For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home, there lied a deeper and darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been, to its ports I've been. Alan Wake came out in 2010, right when my parents started letting me play T-rated games. Maybe it was because it was my first game that offered a darker experience than...
Kyrie's inside me?
But I loved it. The thrilling, twisting gameplay was unlike anything I'd encountered before, and it remained a highlight in my game catalog for years. But how does it hold up a decade after release? That is, does it stand the test of time and bring me the same experiences I remember having 10 years ago? Is this game actually fun, or do I view it with nostalgic rose-colored glasses? Do I stay as immersed in the game as I felt like I did? I replayed it recently as my first foray into streaming on Twitch, and had lots of thoughts about how the game seems to me today. Join me in taking a look at the story, gameplay, and all things in between. This is an Alan Wake Retrospective. Alan Wake, developed by Remedy Studios and published by Microsoft Studios, originally released for the Xbox 360 in May of 2010. Remedy describes Alan Wake as the mind of a psychological thriller and the body of a cinematic action game put together. The game follows a writer named Alan Wake as he gets sucked in the mysterious and supernatural going-ons as he and his wife enter the peaceful town of Bright Falls. He finds that after an incident where his wife is taken from him by a physical manifestation of darkness, pages from a manuscript he doesn't remember writing are coming true, shaping reality. The story is told in an episodic framework, with each episode bookended with a previously on Alan Wake intro and a closing sequence. Alan Wake was Remedy's first game following Max Payne 2, where the team took an extended break to recover from Payne's release. During this time, Remedy founded the idea for Alan Wake and formally announced it at E3 in 2005. Though the game took 5 years to develop, the hype behind it didn't die, launching to critical success and winning awards from IGN and Time magazine, going on to sell 2 million copies by March 2012. The game takes Remedy's usual multimedia approach to video games and storytelling. Much like the studio's later games, Control and Quantum Break, live-action footage was shot and utilized in-game, taking the form of TV segments the player can stumble upon, some of which are based upon real-world episodes of the Twilight Zone stories. The game doesn't take it as far as Quantum Break, which offered full-length episodes that work in conjunction with the main game, but Remedy's desire for a multimedia project is evident all the same. Alan Wake also launched following a 6-part web series called Bright Falls, depicting events that happen in the town prior to Wake's arrival. In-game collectibles take the form of readable excerpts from Alan's work, and inconsequential lore, helping to build the game world. To start our analysis, let's dive deeper into that game world, and examine the story of Alan Wake. Alan Wake, a best-selling author, and his wife Alice arrive by ferry in charming Bright Falls, but not before having a horrible nightmare in which he's chased by both a possessed hitchhiker and a tornado. The two pick up their cabin keys from the local diner, encounter locals, one creepy old woman, and then head to said cabin to unwind. Alice tries to be a good wife and help Alan overcome his writer's block so they can afford their expensive New York apartment, but Alan gets mad at this and storms off. After hearing his wife cry out for help, he runs back inside the cabin to see signs of a struggle.
Oh no!
Then, hoping to save her, dives into the lake. He blacks out. A week passes. Alan wakes up behind the wheel of a crashed car with no memory of how he got there. It's important to note that he's not drunk for once.
I'm a writer, goddammit.
While trying to reach the nearby gas station for help, he encounters the same possessed hitchhiker from his dream, but this time he has friends. These beings are called the Taken, presumably because they've been taken over by some overprotective father. Alan starts to find pages of a manuscript that he wrote, yet has no memory of writing. The things written on the page begin to come true. Spooky. He reaches the gas station and contacts the police, who inform him he's going crazy. The cabin he'd been at a week earlier hasn't existed in years. Later at the police station, Alan gets a call from a man claiming to have kidnapped Alice. He wants the pages of Alan's manuscript in exchange for her. His annoying friend Barry shows up. A lot of fluff happens here, like meeting an annoying FBI agent with a penchant for calling people by the names of authors.
Hemingway! James Joyce.
and a dog. But he finally meets up with the kidnapper. Turns out he never had Alice, and the creepy old woman from earlier used him to try and kill Alan. Alan gets thrown into a lake. Alan... Alan Lake. He wakes up in a cabin, a different one, and meets a gaslighting doctor who tells Alan everything that's been happening is all in his head. Alan's very upset by this and doesn't believe it.
Tell me one more lie and I'll shoot you in the face.
A dark force attacks the cabin as Alan and... Barry? How did Barry get here? Escape. Alan learns that the creepy old woman is actually named Barbara Jagger, and she's actually a being called the Dark Presence. She's trying to escape the lake that Alan dove into by turning fiction into reality, which explains why Alan's manuscript is coming true. Barbara had a lover at one point named Thomas Zane, who met an awful fate and is now stuck in both a place called the Dark Place and a diving suit. Following this unbelievable news, Alan and Barry get drunk on moonshine after a kick-ass fight involving rock music and pyrotechnics. They awake to the annoying FBI agent arresting them. During an interrogation, he calls Alan
Stephen King.
And the comparison to the most famous, yet worst horror author makes the spooky tornado from earlier mad. He kills the FBI agent. The sheriff of Bright Falls helps Alan reach another creepy old woman, but this one's good. She's been waiting for Alan and can help defeat the Dark Presence. They uncover a light switch dubbed the Clicker, an item from Alan's childhood that he wrote into existence again via the manuscript. He also wrote that it can vanquish creepy old lady number 1. Convenient. Alan dives into the lake and winds up in the Dark Place. He successfully commits manslaughter by killing Barbara Jagger with a cool light show. He comes to understand that he cannot free both himself and his wife, so he lets his wife out of the lake and stays behind to finish his manuscript, proving to himself that he never needed his wife to overcome his writer's block. He just needed an annoying friend and 2 creepy old women. In the DLC, dubbed Special Episodes, Alan ventures through the Dark Place. Here, he interacts more closely with Thomas Zane, who guides Alan towards a metaphysical, demented clone of himself. This clone's unfortunately in control of the story, is trying to force the sane player Alan into giving up, thereby letting the chaos run unchecked. There's not much story content in these special episodes to go off of besides this, but after a fight with the TV monster and Barry, Alan regains his sanity by joining his 2 selves together, sitting down to write a sequel to his first manuscript. Using the power of the lake to turn fiction into reality, he hopes it can become a means of his escape from the Dark Place. So when I first played Alan Wake, I thought the story was absolutely captivating. The mystery presented was amplified by the unknown, supernatural force of darkness, and I really enjoyed it. Of course, I was also 10. I didn't really look much deeper than, scary, scary darkness. And the thematic fear presented by the story holds up. Alan faces all kinds of fear, the threat of an unknown force set on killing him, the idea that he may never see his wife again, or that he isn't a good enough husband to warrant having a wife, or the fear that he wouldn't ever write again. Alan Wake is a story about a man overcoming his general fears by giving them personification. Alan's fears are manifested narratively through his battle with the Taken and the Darkness, and as he becomes more adept in fighting them off, the less afraid he becomes as a whole. He starts the game afraid, shown by his unwillingness to write anything, and ends it as a confident man, ready to write as much as he needs to reclaim his spot in the world. It's out of necessity that he conquers these fears. The physical manifestation of the Taken makes his only other option death, but he conquers them all the same. In terms of these themes, the story holds. It's simple and effective at this level. It's the supplementary content that stands as weaker than I remember. There's a decent amount of fluff in this game that caused me to lose interest. The early middle stretch involving the kidnapper offers a foil of sorts to Alan. The kidnapper is fearful for his life as the Dark Presence manipulates him to do its bidding. Where the kidnapper is given into his fear and acts on the whim of the darkness, Alan resists, fighting it the entirety of the story. Narratively, this section makes sense and it's worth including in the story, but isn't fleshed out enough to justify its place. Without looking at Wake's manuscript pages, you wouldn't realize the kidnapper has a name or any grander purpose. He seems inconsequential. Ultimately, he becomes a weak foil to Alan. The part of the story moves slower as a result, especially when the supernatural content on either side of the kidnapper section is just so much more interesting. It was these moments that made me want to keep playing, not the moments surrounding the kidnapper. However, you can't get by on narrative structure alone. You need a strong cast of characters. Not all of them need to be likable, but you'd hope you can find a character you can relate to. Alan and his friend Barry aren't that. Alan is incredibly fluent in the English language, making the narration he provides rather elegant, but he's rather pretentious in his actions and comes off as more arrogant than anything else. We see glimpses into his past showcasing how much of a pompous jerkwad he can be, including mention of a fight with a reporter. Between his stuck-up attitude and how confrontational he can become at a moment's notice, he comes across as more of a frat boy or playboy than a best-selling author. He does show signs of maturity as the story draws near its close, which makes endgame Alan more bearable, but you cannot help but hate him near the start of the story. Barry is Alan's insufferable friend, a typical "I'm walking here" type of New Yorker. Similarly to Alan, he shows signs of maturity toward the end of the game, and you can see him for the big heart-having fool he is. But again, that doesn't make him more bearable in the early parts of the game, nor his sue your ass off first glance we get from him as the player. Are these characters relatable in any way? Now, I've never been a frat boy or a New Yorker, but I think the characters are too shallow to offer any kind of relatability. The empathy players feel relates more to the narrative. Do I feel the same fear that a character in this situation might feel? Definitely. But could that empathy be then elevated if Alan were replaced with any likable character? Instead of Alan, picture Nathan Drake from Uncharted in this scenario. Would you care about Drake more because he seems more human? His problems are something more real. I can relate to the spot that Alan's in, but less so with who he is as a person. I do like the storytelling structure of the game, treating each chunk like its own episode, and creating a noticeable divide in content is maybe one of the coolest features. It ensures that each long stretch has a solid amount of highs and lows for the player, and creates cliffhangers in a way that keeps the player ready to play more. I think it creates a more cinematic feel. A cliffhanger feels more impactful when there's an end-of-episode segment, as opposed to resolving it immediately after. The game creates additional suspense just from having this structure, and it helps to keep the pace flowing. The story's a little less well-built than I remember it being. It still offers a great narrative thematically, but could have offered something better had it been more realized and fleshed out in certain parts. Having more likable characters would have boosted the narrative a lot, but for as much as I disliked Alan and Barry, the story would be much worse off if they were perfect characters, as would any story. But now, let's take a step back and dive into the gameplay, see how that holds up. Now, it's really hard to address Alan Wake as a game. Its first goal seems to be to create a cinematic experience over a video game, and in doing so, the developers make choices that hinder the game. Gameplay is pretty simplistic. Players control Alan with a small array of firearms and a light source at his disposal. While fighting the Taken, Alan must use the light to burn away a protective dark layer before he can damage them with his firearms. At this level, it becomes slightly more strategic than a basic third-person shooter. The player has to manage their time between burning the light away, damaging the Taken, and keeping enough breathing room. The Taken are somewhat aggressive and will swarm the player if given the chance, so there's a need to stay mobile. If overwhelmed, the player can dodge out of harm's way. Flares and flashbangs can assist the player by wearing down the dark layer or outright destroying them, and these features add greatly to the player's chance of survival. But the enemy variety leaves a lot to be desired. There's only 3 noticeable breeds of Taken, which I've dubbed Standard, Heavy, and Annoying. The Standard Taken offer little in terms of threat, but can easily overwhelm Alan in higher numbers. Heavies are the same as the Standard type, but take more bullets to bring down and have a stronger dark layer protecting them. The Annoying types are the same as the other two, but zip around the map so fast that you can't burn their shield, but they also don't often make an attempt to attack you. It was easiest just to ignore these kinds of Taken and head straight for the next checkpoint. The player also faces poltergeist-possessed objects and murderous flocks of birds, but these mainly serve as obstacles with little threat. The birds in particular are just very annoying. They do so little damage to Alan, but do a lot to hinder his movement. It leaves a lot to be desired, as taking down the same enemy only remains interesting for so long. The enemy variety is often faked via circumstances not related to the number of enemies. How many Taken Alan has to take on at once is a factor, as hordes are definitely harder to face than single enemies. However, the enemy variety is further faked depending on how many tools Alan has in his possession. The game takes many opportunities to reset your inventory, and the player's constantly having to recollect tools. Depending on what the game throws the player, You may have to rely on external light sources to destroy the dark protective layer on the Taken, or you may be left with only a flashlight and another character has to handle damaging them. These create unique strategic moments, yet leave the player frustrated. I would finish a segment of the game only to find my inventory wiped out by a forced balancing of the game. Having to make do with the tools you have is less fun if you feel you should have more tools to use. And speaking of tools, there'd be times where I press a button prompt to swap out a weapon, only for the game not to register it, sometimes resulting in Alan's demise. Movement felt tedious at times. Alan has a very limited sprinting time and moves at a naturally slower pace than what most video games would move their protagonist at. This makes traversal lengthier than it needs to be and makes gameplay feel much longer. There are also occasional platforming stretches that usually only involve a brief hop across a gap, but the janky controls make these more infuriating than they should be. The game will occasionally let Alan drive a vehicle, though those handle super poorly. I found myself crashing into objects unintentionally, missing Taken while trying to hit them with the car, or drifting the car for no other reason than turning the joystick too far. This added to the tedium I felt while playing the game. A lot of these things may in part be to create a stronger cinematic experience. Alan's janky movement and short sprinting difference could be a result of his actual physicality. The balancing of the game does match up with story moments where Alan would lose his gear, but do these things actually add to an experience of a game? I believe they help to create cinematic experiences, but actually hinder these things as a game. Every time Alan runs out of breath while sprinting, it pulls me out of my immersion. I can't look at my empty inventory without groaning, even if it makes sense story-wise. The choices made here certainly create an experience that's intriguing to watch and follow along with, but ruin the immersion of playing a video game. But on the plus side, the game still does look nice. I'm not sure if the Xbox version holds up because I was playing it on PC, but the game still looks as graphically nice as I remember it. The pre-rendered cutscenes have aged and you can tell some textures are dated, but the game itself looks good and feels smooth if you're willing to overlook some odd or dated animation, which, for the time period, was honestly pretty decent. Bottom line, for all the things I said, it was still fun to replay Alan Wake, but if only to re-experience the story. Looking at it with more analytical eyes helped uncover some themes I honestly couldn't have cared less about as a kid. It was a little disheartening to find out that it was less fun to play the game than it was to experience it. Enemies got old fast, as did the constant resets of my inventory, to where I think the game would have been better as an actual TV show as opposed to a game pacing itself as one. One of my Twitch viewers pointed out that he didn't care at all to watch the game being played, and only tuned in because aspects of the story were interesting, and I agree. This game still offers a unique narrative worth experiencing, but 10 years later, it's a lot less immersive than I remember. Alan Wake has the plot to back it up, but in terms of gameplay, it falls flat, and feels like a proof of concept for something stronger, perhaps a eventual sequel, which sadly never came to fruition. Hey, thanks so much for watching the video. Making YouTube videos has been something I've wanted to do for a while, and with streaming on Twitch and having the footage already, it seemed like a good thing to do, so I hope you enjoyed watching. Special thanks to my friends Tom and Ben and my old film professor Jim, who really helped out with nailing out some of the rougher parts of the script and making it into something I was at least proud of putting out there. If you like the video and want to support me, you can subscribe to this channel on YouTube. I also stream on Twitch. I have a Patreon and a Twitter account as well, and you can check those out. I'll put links to them in the description down below. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see ya in the next video. Bye.